So I am going to call the October 29th, 2024 meeting of the Jericho Planning Commission to order. I want to just say a couple of things at the beginning. First, thank you very much to my fellow Planning Commission members for being here tonight. This is actually an extra rescheduled early sort of meeting. So I appreciate everyone being very flexible with your schedules and being willing to carve out additional personal time to volunteer to serve the town. It's important, it needs to be acknowledged. I would also like to say that this is Chris Shaheen's first meeting running our meeting with us as the town planner. Very excited to be kind of moving forward with the next new chapter with him. I also wanted to send good vibes to Chris Brown, who's not here today because his son is in the soccer finals or quarterfinals, so we'll send him some good vibes. And welcome to our guests, and thank you NMCTV and Nancy, Erin, for being here with us tonight. Just let me go over the agenda quickly. We are going to have a few minutes for public comment, approve our minutes of October 15th, and then spend the bulk of the time tonight continuing work that the Planning Commission has been working on for several months on looking at updates to Jericho's land use and development regulations, concentrated mostly on the village centers, and that work we've been working with a consultant, and it is funded by a grant from the state called the Bylaw Modernization Grant. And Chris is going to facilitate that portion of the discussion for us. Then we will share updates with each other, keep everybody informed about what's going on, potentially entertain any other business, then wrap up in planning for our next meetings. And the dates for the next meetings will be part of our discussion. And then we are going to have an executive session to discuss a recommendation for the applicant for the PC vacancy, and then adjourn, hopefully at 9 o'clock. Does anybody have any adjustments to the agenda? Okay. Next is public comment. So does any member of the public wish to share a comment with the Planning Commission? Anybody online, Sabina? Okay.
Nobody's here tonight from the public.
Okay, we have 2 members of the public here with us at the meeting, just so you know. Okay, then we'll move on. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of October 15th?
Motion to approve.
Eric, thank you. And a second?
I'll second.
Wendy, thank you. Any changes or edits, clarifications on the minutes? And whoever added in the executive session details to the minutes, thank you for doing that. It was probably Chris Flynn. Okay, so then we'll vote to approve the minutes of October 15th. All those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, so minutes of October 15th are approved. I did mean to also say at the beginning, when I was recognizing that this is Chris Shaheen's first meeting with us, that we did very much appreciate and want to acknowledge the support that we had from Chris Flynn, who stepped in for a couple of months and worked with us as interim planner and made sure that we could continue our work. And we thank him and really appreciate that. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Chris, who is going to talk to us a little bit about where we are in the process on the zoning updates and what work remains to be done. And then we'll be having a discussion on what we have affectionately called tonight batch 2, which is a set of zoning amendments that were prepared for us by the consultant that we started talking about in our last meeting and needed to finish tonight.
Great. Good. Go to the next slide. We are reviewing batch 2, and I'm going to kind of set it up, just sort of as a reminder for where we are. So the bylaw modernization grant is looking specifically at updates to the village center and character-based zone, Jericho Center, Jericho Corners, and Riverside. So they're focused in those areas. You want to go to the next slide? So what is on this slide are the focus areas of the grant as it's defined in the grant agreement with the Vermont Department of Housing and Community Development, which is the one who's funding the grant. So it's really focusing on the 3 designated village centers. It's really about simplifying the character-based zone, trying to tighten up the village center zoning in preparations for what we hope is going to be more development, particularly if we get a wastewater treatment plan in place, so making sure all the groundwork's in place for that. Also specifically looking at the Vermont State Guide Enabling Better Places. It's a zoning for Vermont neighborhoods. It's a great guide. I refer to it a lot. I know consultants look through it too in terms of informing what we are specifically looking at in our current zoning. See how it can be made more friendly, user-friendly, and get the results that we're hoping to get. Also creating vibrant, walkable, mixed-use village centers. All of this is reinforced by our town plan also. And then, like I just said, aligning with the town plan and then anticipated future wastewater infrastructure. Also across the bottom, just sort of as a reminder, these chunks of red lines that the Planning Commission is reviewing as we are moving through the process. There are 3 batches. Susan mentioned that we're currently in batch 2. Batch 1 looked at process and architectural standards. Batch 2 is looking at dimensions and uses. And batch 3 is the character-based zone. So we are currently looking at dimensions and uses. And these line up with chapters of the bylaws in the current zoning. Go to the next slide. In terms of timeline, this is our updated timeline, which we are going to try and stick to. There are some unknowns that we're still working through. So we're still sort of sorting through all of the comments for batch 2 and batch 3. So determining, that's going to determine what the scope of revisions is that we're going to be working with the consultant. So that's a sort of an unknown. We need to consider some timing around the town budget as it's going to the select board, which is going to be in March. If you look at our timeline, in a perfect unfettered world, it's getting to the select board also in March. So that may also lead to some shifting. And then the red lines that have gone out for review included some recommendations that go beyond the scope of the grant. So we need to kind of figure out exactly what those are and how to bundle those and package those, because we don't want to lose some of those changes because they're still really good changes. So we just need to kind of figure out how that's going to work and how we might want to discuss those and move those forward as well. So that's where we are. And I've allotted some staff time to work with the consultant, and we'll be checking in and coordinating with Susan and making sure the board's, weighing in at the appropriate times. So the next thing to look for is we'll have, if you want to go to the next.
Before you go, what is the contracted end date of the grant?
The contract goes through the end of FY25.
Which is August.
Next year.
Right, August next year.
I'm not exactly sure the month.
Federal fiscal year, state fiscal year?
I don't know for sure. All I know is when I asked, it was so far out, I wasn't worried about it. There is an issue with our contract with our consultant is on a shorter time frame, but we can extend that and that won't be an issue. If you want to hit, if you're using great. So we are not meeting next Tuesday, which is the first Tuesday of the month when the Planning Commission typically meets. We would like to have a meeting the second Tuesday of the month, which is November 12th. We need to confirm that with commission members that it's going to work. So I'll send out something after this meeting to see if that's going to work. So the next thing is just for the commission and for anyone else to know, after today, we'll look at batch 3 on the 12th, hopefully finalize comments and get those sent off to the consultants on November 19th. have a couple weeks to work through what those comments are, maybe come back to the commission if there's some questions that need to be answered, then do a full review beginning of January, wrap things up and then get into the hearing cycle in February. We understand that select board does want to have 2 public hearings to review whatever the proposed changes are, so we'll factor that into the schedule.
SJ, do you have a clarification question?
I just wanted to say that Affordable Housing was planning to meet on the second Tuesday of the month, which is their usual meeting time. So just for what it's worth.
Yeah, that was one of the things we had on the list, was to not only could we get a quorum, but could we get the room? Were there any conflicts? So we'll have to work that out offline.
Yeah, SJ, forgive me if I'm interrupting and going way off topic, but I suspect that'll be a relatively short meeting. Is that true for you as well?
I think kind of the exact opposite. So so I don't know.
Fair enough.
So we do want to make sure, we do want to keep things moving, which was our goal for scheduling the additional meeting. If we can't find another meeting, we'll just we'll adjust the timeline and make it work. If we need to figure out another time for a meeting, we'll figure that out.
Yeah, so we could look at a different day, we could look at a different location. It's complicated, but we just, so we'll work it out. But thanks for letting us know, because that was a question we had, so now we know the answer.
All right, any other questions on timeline? Oh, next slide. All right, now kind of getting into the fun stuff. So thank you, everyone, all of the planning commission members that took the time to go through and look at the red lines for batch 2. This was looking at specific sections of zoning that dealt with definitions, zoning districts, zoning uses, and dimensional standards. And dimensional standards that includes things like setbacks, lot coverage, also included building height. This is a summary of all of the comments that we've gotten so far. There are also comments from staff. So the first section for definitions, there were a lot of comments on clarification of certain terms. The terms that are just shown in regular font, no issues with the comments, we'll just move those forward. The household, the words that are highlighted on here are the ones we're going to be discussing in a little more detail tonight. So for clarification for the definitions, household is a term we want to discuss a little more. There's also some comments on including some new definitions, which are shown here. For the second section for zoning districts, again, these are just comments that were not an issue with them, which was emphasizing the role of schools in the village center definitions and better highlighting the differences between the village centers. For zoning uses, there were some clarifications that were requested for the terms that are up here. We are going to have a little discussion about outdoor dining and entertainment areas. There was some question about whether or not entertainment uses should be added, so we'll talk about that a little bit. And then there were some proposed changes that came up in the comments. One of the comments is about larger apartment buildings and what village centers they may or may not be appropriate in, as well as some other use stuff. We're going to talk about that. And then the last section for dimensional lots, dimensional things, we're going to look at some additional information that our consultant gave us, some updates, and then I have some questions for the commission about how that is actually going to apply to the different village center zones. And then in general, there were comments about making sure that the terms were consistent throughout the bylaws, and then thinking about what the scope of the grant was, trying to limit changes to the village center and character-based zones, but also knowing that some of the other issues that have been raised are really important and we don't want to miss out on those, and figuring out how to package those. So, all right, next slide. All right, so our first issue to discuss is this definition of household. A little information just on how these slides are presented. So across the top is the question that we should be focusing on. On the left in the little inset box is just background information of guidance that's coming from the Enabling Better Places guide and guidance in the town plan. So that's what those two things are on the left side. Specifically in the Enabling Better Places guide, there's a discussion about households and making the language more general, so it doesn't discriminate against family status. The way Jericho's current bylaws read for a definition of household, it's very specific in calling out the number of people that are related, and the number of people that are unrelated. The language in the Enabling Better Places guide talks about making it more general. So here you can see the current definition and then the proposed definition, which is just something that I pulled together, which is household, an individual or multiple adults and children living together as a single household housekeeping unit, also known as a household unit. So I think the first point of discussion is, do we think that this is the right move to make in terms of not just looking at our village centers, but this is going to have, it's going to apply across Jericho. So first question is, are we comfortable with this?
I think we definitely need to change it. So,
The,
yes, I'm comfortable with it.
the issue is right now we're saying not more than 5 unrelated persons, which implies by getting rid of that, that you could have more than 5 people in the house. What's there to control occupancy within the house, overcrowding within the house itself? I realize that's probably down the road, but if you have 20 people in a house and it's only got 1 bathroom, or 20 people in a house that's 1,500 or 1,000 square feet or less, there doesn't seem to be a correlation between how many people are in there and the density within it.
There would currently be nothing.
Well, currently it's more than
Oh,
5.
if this were to change, there would be nothing that would set a max.
Is that something that we as planning commission have any issue with? Do we care?
I don't care. And we don't define people who are related by blood. We don't say that
Right.
you have a maximum of people who are related by blood. I think it needs to be equitable. If we go with does the word housekeeping or the phrase housekeeping unit, does that need to be defined? Is that getting too granular? As a single housekeeping unit.
Is a housekeeping unit 1 bedroom with a kitchen, or is a housekeeping unit something more? And does it imply you've got a housekeeping service there for it? To go a little off the rails, but I thought that way.
I think housekeeping unit is more of a term, it's almost an archaic term. Like, I remember my grandmother saying, oh, you're going to set up housekeeping.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, would
Well, what's the
would a housing unit be a better way to say it?
but a housing unit is a physical thing, which we, in our regulations, called a dwelling unit. So as you were talking, I was thinking like, well, what is the regulatory, not impact, but the regulatory consequence or privilege or restriction that's related to a household at all? Like if we, why do we have to define household at all? Not, or why, how do the regulations use the concept of household? I can't think off the top of my head, because I know we regulate like a boarding house, a dwelling unit, a 3-unit building, a duplex. Those are physical structures. And this is about the people who live inside those physical structures. And I can't think of something in the zoning that says red or blue about people who live inside structures for any reason.
You know, 2 of you had asked, like, how is household used in the regs? And I know it is referred to in the regulations, and I can't tell you in what context. But it's defined because it is used, it's referred to.
Right. So maybe by looking to see, that would help either address the point that Eric raised and also the equity issue that Wendy raised.
So what is the underlying concern?
On my side, it's that we end up with 25 unrelated people living in a house that doesn't have facilities for them.
Overcrowded house.
Overcrowded housekeeping with all the attendant issues that come with that. You know, think slumlords, I mean, just to, I don't think we have any of that in Jericho, but if you had someone who's like, oh, great, I've got an apartment, I mean, I would think that would be something we don't want to encourage. But at the same time, to Wendy's point, yeah, if you want to have friends and family over and there's 20 of you and you're living as a commune or something like that, have at it, I guess. But maybe if we just change that from housekeeping to dwelling unit. I assume that if you have a multi-story, multi-apartment building, each one is a dwelling unit. And that takes care of the housekeeping piece. And then it's just, do we want to have unlimited number of people living in a dwelling unit?
I don't know how you would come, I don't know how I would come up with a number that didn't feel arbitrary, that wasn't grounded in any kind of research or anything, you know, it just feels very arbitrary to say 8 or 10 or 11, and it's not enforceable.
Well, I would imagine housing and urban development, part of HUD has some of those restrictions on what they would consider to be.
There might be like persons per bathroom
Mhm.
Something like
ratios
that.
somewhere, but I hear what you're saying, like, instead of pulling like the number out of the sky.
Right.
Yeah, and I don't think municipality like Jericho has safe and habitable housing standards that they would do enforcement on, or maybe.
We
maybe
don't,
do.
no,
Yeah,
there's no building code.
yeah,
Yeah.
which I think would get at what you're asking about, Eric, like how would we deal with that if it was an unsanitary condition because of the number of people there?
So in the batch 2 red line though, this wasn't a previously shown change on the red line. So this is a new item.
This
New
is a-
definition.
A question about household was raised
Oh, I see.
as a comment.
Gotcha.
And then when I checked the enabling Better Places
Gotcha.
guide, it was like, oh, this is a specific issue we should be talking about.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's general support. There's concern about health issues. I made a note here to look up specifically on the definition and what that means. And then I'll also look at what options there might be to deal with the health and safety issues. Right. Cool. If we want to move on to the next one. So I have in my mind a general idea of how much time to spend on answering questions, but I don't know how in depth we're going to get on the. So I will try and keep things moving along, but so far I think we're doing pretty good on time.
Just give us the hands.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, universal. Okay,
But I appreciate, Chris, that you framed it
Yes.
the way that you have.
Really helpful.
Like, here's the yellow, everything that's not in yellow seems good to go, the way the planning commission comments came in. The yellow, it's like, let's deliberate on them and have a discussion. And then give you the direction you need to then be able to instruct David how to make the change.
Great, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you for that. So that's a good cue up for this next one, because there were some comments about we don't have entertainment uses clearly defined in our regulations. Which seems like it would be a good thing to have clearly defined because of what entertainment uses, and I added outdoor dining because that was something that had come up in previous discussions, in terms of reinforcing village centers as inviting as walkable places and as destinations, is the type of thing that draws people to a place. It's funny, we were just talking I've been at this planning conference for the last 2 days. And people were talking about how if they want to drive someplace to like pick up a prescription at CVS, they want to park right in front of CVS. Because that's what they expect. But if they're going to a place that's a destination, they care less about where they're parking because it's more of a place. And I think that is what we were thinking in terms of these village centers. And entertainment uses and outdoor dining are the types of things that are going to create in these as an inviting places. My question is, or the question is, what is it about these uses that make them inviting? Because we want to make sure that the allowances that as they're defined in the regulations are actually achieving that goal. And so one of the examples that came up when we were talking about outdoor dining before, I know there was a question about fence height around it. If the purpose of having these uses is to make them active places, we don't want a 6-foot privacy fence around an outdoor dining space. So in general, if we can talk a little bit more about what we want to achieve by having these uses in the village centers. And then that can inform how we define the uses in the code and define their allowances.
Are you looking for suggestions on?
Well, it could be as simple as, the way that the outdoor of a theater is designed, or there's large signage, or what about these types of uses make a place look exciting and inviting as a specific type of use? Is it simply that they just activate the street? Do they activate building facades?
Well, something that makes an outdoor space inviting for me is landscaping elements. Are we kind of in brainstorm mode here?
Yeah,
Okay, so we get going, like I think St. Albans has done a really good job with how they have planters along the streets and the extent to which, they're everywhere and they're beautiful and it makes it an inviting space. And Chris, to your point about outdoor dining, where you can see people, you can see your neighbors as you're walking down the street, and you can either, wave to them if they're eating or have a brief conversation, or, but it's integrated with the street, not necessarily, I understand there has to be some degree of separation, but it just feels open.
Building on that, it made me think about the last time I was in a city. And a lot of what you might see that makes the street feel more inviting, particularly if you've got retail, is that ability to put out movable display. To have the clothes rack out in the street, or to have your rack of cards out on the street that people will stop and peruse as they're walking down the street. And I don't know if we're allowing that at this point in the district, that along with outdoor dining, maybe not huge planters, but again, something you can roll out and then roll back in at the end of the day. So the street can be cleaned and all of that. But not something that blocks traffic from walking by.
What do we think qualifies as an entertainment use?
It depends if shopping's your hobby, that's browsing in the bookstore or whatever.
Shopping is great entertainment for some people.
Or if you wanted to people watching, sitting on the table drinking a cup of coffee is great.
So I did a search of the zoning regs, and the entertainment is only in the bylaws once, and it's under the definition of tavern.
Interesting. So do you think in general that retail and entertainment should be differentiated, or can entertainment, or is one a category of another, or are you thinking of them as somewhat separate?
It's kind of an open question because there was a specific comment, do we need to include entertainment use as something specific?
Right, okay, so then they probably were thinking, because we have a lot of retail in the zoning. So what do think of as entertainment uses to me is I think currently dining is kind of considered a retail use. But entertainment, I guess immediately to me, I think of, social situations or viewing situations or listening, participating, kind of art, culture, theater.
So when Kate's puts on a band on the summer nights, is that entertainment or is that dining or is that some of both?
Some of both, but I think it's both. I guess that would be dining and entertainment compared to another restaurant that doesn't have any entertainment. They just have dining.
Or going down to, higher ground and just listening to a show?
Yeah. Because I think entertainment does have some specific land use impacts. So some entertainment is like come and go, like you're going into see the band at Kate's and I can come at 7:30 and you can come at 8, compared to going to like the Flynn where 1,000 people arrive at 7 o'clock at night and then 1,000 cars leave at 9 o'clock at night. So what do you call that? Like the interval entertainment where you have like high intensity arrival, departure, bigger buildings, bigger crowds, different than a cafe, and would have different parking, circulation. I also think of entertainment has a little bit more noise ramifications. So I think about hours of operation. And I also think about outdoor lighting. So what makes an outdoor space really inviting is great outdoor lighting that's very like hospitable and doesn't show all your wrinkles. But also that is a lot different than what we appreciate a lot. A lot of our residents appreciate, which is quiet, night sky, safety, not a lot of people that you don't know coming and going. So there's, you can't control for everything, but they are considerations. If we want these kinds of uses to be compatible with all the residential uses that are in close proximity, it seems like they can't go till 3 o'clock in the morning, blaring loud music, totally lighting up like, the Red Sox, like not the Red Sox,
The lake monsters.
yeah, the Lake Monsters.
I have a
Um,
question.
Go ahead.
How would defining entertainment affect people who host like house concerts? Because I know some people in town who have done that in the past, and I'm just wondering if they would fit into that definition somehow, or are they exempt because it's generally private enterprise and smaller crowds?
Can you define what that house concert is? That just, I'm having a birthday
Well,
party.
like I know a neighbor who will hire a band and then invite people to come and listen, but not just like their 7 closest friends, they'll basically I've never been involved directly, so I don't know if they charge admission, but it might involve admission.
Yeah, I've been to a few not in Jericho, but house concerts. It's, the owner of the house has some type of connection to a musician and that's what the musician does. Instead of touring in venues, they tour in houses.
Right.
And so you do pay, a ticket fee for the entertainer, the artist.
But that's usually not in the village center.
Well, house concerts can be anywhere.
As a practical matter.
Yeah.
Are they more often if you got 10 acres or something, 5 acres, put it on?
Well, I've always been in ones that are inside, literally inside someone's house.
Okay.
Or someone mentioned the outdoor concerts at Kate's, right?
Yeah.
Is that a type of entertainment use we want to encourage or promote?
I think it's great. It's just down here. They're only open in the summertime. It's a trailer built restaurant. I don't know what you call a restaurant that's built on a trailer platform, but they do great business.
And then is that a type of use, an outdoor concert or entertainment venue like that? Is that something that would be appropriate in each of the village centers, or maybe in one or two, or not the third, or?
Presently, it's not in a village center, it's just past the big white building where the hardware store is. So it's, it's
Yeah.
kind of open space.
It's between the village center zones.
Yes,
It's in the commercial district.
commercial district.
Well, Jericho Cafe and Tavern, they often have, entertainment mostly inside the building. But I could kind of see them doing something outside potentially. They don't really have property as much.
When COVID, when they had the tent out, they were doing that.
Oh,
So
yeah, that's right.
it's kind of fun.
Yeah.
So
I would not be opposed to saying, yes, entertainment is allowed within the village centers. Just, do we want 1,000-seat concert hall? Maybe not. Do we want a 20-seat, a restaurant that happens to have a bar in the corner? Absolutely. Or, sorry, a restaurant that has a band in the corner, a bar with a band in the corner.
Anything else? I think that was helpful. Anything more on this? We can just.
Onto the streetscape as well, though, I really do think the idea of being allowed to have movable displays to allow browsing down the street is something we should have.
Yeah, and I think this is what we're gonna get into on batch 3, gets into more of some of the streetscape requirements. But I think we do want to think about, if we want to have outdoor seating, what do you really need for an outdoor cafe area? Like 4 feet's probably too tight, is 7 what we want? I mean, then that would factor into sort of setback requirements, street width, street, all that kind of stuff. So I think we need to think about that when we get to that phase, but this helps inform that discussion too. All right, next. Great. All right, so the next 2 things to talk about, it's more specific of use and dimensions and how they apply specifically to the 3 village centers. So the town plans calls out very specifically that we've got 3 village centers with, distinct identities, with distinct traditions. Jericho Corners, Jericho Center, Riverside. I know, I think over the summer, there were some walking tours where the planning commission members went to the 3 different areas and made some observations. I wanted to hear a little bit more and talk a little bit about what the characteristics are, like the physical characteristics that differentiate the 3, and also the types of uses that might differentiate the 3 and help define them as places. And when we get into the discussion of the uses and the dimensions, they're sort of all the same right now. And I don't know if that's right. So I want to kind of better understand what it is that we think that makes those 3 places distinct.
Are they the same in the current or the same in the red line? For both?
Both.
Okay, so the red line didn't propose specific standards that were different, other than in the Riverside character.
Well, like currently, we will get to that.
Okay.
We will get to that.
Okay,
But
so
first,
staying at the higher level.
staying at the
Okay.
higher level, is there a difference in what you see on the street in terms of the building placement, all that kind of stuff, in Jericho Corners versus Jericho Center? I mean, obviously Jericho Center has the green space in the middle, but in terms of like the arrangement of the buildings that are on the streets, is there much of a difference between Jericho Corners and Jericho Centers and the older residential section and Riverside?
I think one of the defining characteristics of Jericho Corners for me, and it's kind of a negative, it's Route 15 and the speed limits, and the varying speed limits on Route 15. From 25 to 35, 40, 50, and very short.
Well, you're forgetting, it goes from 25, 35 for a little bit, then back to 25, and then out again. It's 25 in the school district, it's 35 here.
No,
It's 25
it's only
down.
25 when it's flashing, it's 35 normal, past Griswold. Like, it's 35.
I guess I drive slow all the time.
You do?
But we did hear,
Thank you.
when we did those walking visits, you guys observed how noisy it was.
Oh, yeah.
So not just the speed brings noise.
Yeah.
That was true of Jericho, of the Riverside as well. You get up there and the cars are going along right down everybody's front yard. That's faster, I think, than it was here.
In terms of the characteristics that differentiate the three villages, is that because the buildings are closer to Route 15 than they are in the other areas, or is it really just because of the amount of traffic?
I think the amount of traffic is the overwhelming impact. I think in the center rather, they're maybe a little bit closer to the street than they are here or on Riverside. But no one's doing 50 miles an hour down through the corners.
My sense is that Jericho Corners is a little more compact than Jericho Center and Riverside. The Riverside Center and Jericho Center and Riverside seem a little more spread out, the buildings, than Jericho Corners, or at least the corner of Jericho Corners,
The corner of Jericho.
where the War Memorial
15
is.
and
Okay.
River
Like
Road.
right here,
Gotcha.
basically.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but it just feels more compact here than the other areas.
Yeah, I would say that.
If you're just looking at the corner, maybe, but then if you're up at Jericho Center, where the church is, right by Dessos, that's that's roughly the same area with about the same amount of houses in there between the old high school, the Jericho Community Center, around to the Jericho General Store. I think it's fairly close to right here.
Something that's not being mentioned, and I guess I'm gonna prop this. When I think of Jericho Center, the large meeting house is clearly a defining feature of that area. So in terms of height and scale, that's predominant. In terms of Jericho Corners, I think the mill might define it for us, but it doesn't really stand out because it's sort of tucked back, but it is a defining feature. Whereas in Riverside, I don't feel like there's anything really defining it. This is as a person who's been here for 5 weeks.
Well, it's fabulous that you've only been here for 5 weeks because your objective and your powers of observation are so helpful compared to, you see the same thing every day, you don't notice it. So that's great.
So what's your response to my observations?
I would say in Jericho Corners, I think you're right, the mill is kind of tucked back, but as a resident, the defining buildings in the area are the town hall, partly maybe because I've come here so much, but the Jericho Elementary School,
And Joe.
Joe's, JCAT, and the horse farm. Those are sort of like the big visual, where if something happened to one of those, or if one of those changed a lot, that would be like a big change.
JCAT is the proof you're in the center.
Yeah,
Joe's is the corner, Town Hall Elementary School, and then Horse Farm, you're out.
and right, that's sort of the continuum. And then for Riverside, which I would say it seems like the defining building, which is a relatively new building, is the Jericho Market.
And are we only
More so
switching
than
of
Mills River
buildings
Park.
when we're talking about the
Right.
characteristics?
Well, Eric just said Mills Riverside Park.
I said, is
Oh, yeah.
the store more of the defining than the Mills River Park?
I guess kind of in the same way. The continuum would be Mills Riverside Park, Farmers Market,
Yeah.
Browns River Middle School, Jericho Market, lots of little houses, and then boom, you're out. Once you're Underhill, kind of you're out. And then Jericho Center, you're sort of approaching high school, big hill up Rivers property,
Fire
houses, the green, community, fire department, right? Fire department, community center, the store. And then boom, you're out. Library, boom, you're out. So those are like the iconic, for me,
So
landmarks.
Wendy had asked, are we just talking about buildings? Kind of, because we're talking about the bylaws, which is regulating land use. So it's the buildings, but it's also the use.
Mhm.
So this is queuing up two questions.
Okay.
One is going to be about use and one is going to be about sort of the physical environment. But you asked that, Wendy, was that because there's something else you?
Well, like one of the defining, if we're not just limited to buildings, it's that iconic view of Mansfield. For me, that's like a defining characteristic of Riverside.
That's a defining view, pretty much once you get to Silly Hill on.
Yeah.
That's what you look at.
All right, so if you can go to the next slide, Sabina. Oh, Sabina, did you have anything to add?
No, nothing new. I agree with everyone's comments.
There room for public comment at this point, or is it really the
It's
commission?
really just the planning commission,
Okay.
but when we finish this section, then we'll give you a chance to comment. And just so you know, we're not actually making any decisions or anything for quite a while. So there's plenty of time if we don't hear everything that you could talk to Chris anytime or me anytime also. And thank you
Would
for
their
asking.
comments inform our discussion at all?
Yeah, but I think we should follow Chris's agenda and then we can circle back.
So thinking about the three different areas, I know we're talking about physical uses, but you were actually talking about town hall and the library and more like institutional uses. And those get to the uses things. So thinking about the three village centers and land use and what's actually happening there. The Enabling Better Places Guide specifically talks about eliminating unnecessary use restrictions. It's talks specifically about housing. And then the town plan talks about how we want to really concentrate different types of uses in the town centers. What you see here on the right, so those are what I kind of thought of as sort of like the iconic things for defining each of the areas, which I'm so happy because they actually came up in our discussion, so that was good. All of the words that are listed there on the lower right side, those are all words in the use table that are either prohibited or listed as a conditional use in the village centers. I guess the question is, should they be conditional? Should we just open up all uses? Like I was a little surprised that a gallery was a conditional use. I think it was in Jericho Center. The gallery and the museum were conditional uses in Jericho Center, which seemed to me like it would be, it would kind of fit with the historic character of the area.
Many of those I think would be perfectly appropriate, but I look at motor sales, car wash, vehicle repair, fuel sales, we've got the manufacturing. I think those, they might look a little out of place in the three village centers. We have space for them in the commercial district that would be perfectly appropriate.
But we're talking about conditional use, not necessarily prohibiting them.
No, but actually the fact that it was raised now is helpful because if they were to be allowed, and because we're trying to create these walkable village centers, so maybe not having an auto-oriented business in that area is what we want.
We don't have it now either.
But maybe it's okay if there's some design constraints around it or some guidance as to what would make it appropriate, what would make it fit into that environment.
Right, I gave this example the last time, if you got a motor sales, if it's like a EV showroom kind of thing, like Tesla sells cars in a mall, in a key, like they only have one car in the thing, it's a small space and it fits perfectly well within a retail space. So maybe if it's limited in size and limited in traffic in and out, then motor sales would be okay. I think, a giant parking lot of 60 cars would not be the highest and best value of the property, of the village center land.
I think it would feel out of
Yeah.
place if you had. Go ahead, Sabina.
I'm just wondering if somebody can define fuel sales more specifically, because I thought that was like a gas station. And all three village centers have gas stations, so clearly it's not that. So what is that, like a propane dealer, or what is that exactly?
I'll have to look that up to answer your question, but I think it is a gas station. Because I think this is, someone raised this about fuel
Well, so
sales.
like in the picture right there and on the country store, there's gas, that's gas sales, that's active. Then there's the Jolly, that's pretty big. And then there's the Chittenden Mill. So we already have fuel sales happening.
Yeah, I don't think these were prohibited uses. Some of these were conditional uses.
Right. Okay, I just wasn't sure if it was something different than gas stations. That's where my mind went, and I wasn't sure if I was right on that.
I think, like, if you were gonna build a new gas station today, somebody builds, 8 pumps and the giant illuminated canopy is a lot different than 2 gas pumps from the 1950s in front of the,
But that's what the Jolly did.
yeah, that's true.
I think if the other fuel cells would be heating oil, propane,
Yeah, that's,
and
yeah.
we're gonna have like a 500-gallon propane bullet.
Mhm.
That's a very different look.
It's not really about the aesthetics, though. It's really about the function.
The function of a commercial filling station
Mhm.
would be very different than just a regular gas station.
Mhm.
Another specific one was multi-unit housing of 10 or more. I think it was the bigger unit housing was, it's either precluded or prohibited or conditional use in Jericho Center.
That may be because there's no wastewater. But Jericho Center's got a lot of soil that's not suitable for wastewater, whereas Corners and Riverside does.
But if there was a technological innovation that happened, the zoning wouldn't allow it.
We can change the zoning if that ever happens.
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
But we're
thought
changing
was-
it now.
I thought it was conditional, but you're saying that
It's a conditional use now.
it's conditional now. And
Well, I'd have to check. I think it may be conditional.
I think currently 5 or more. And the David's red line created a new category of 10 or more.
Correct.
Okay, so then his suggestion was 10 or more was permitted in the 2 and then conditional in Jericho Center. And I think the reason that was his recommendation was because of what we were just talking about, that the scale of the buildings and the scale of the development and the pattern and everything in Jericho Center was where that would maybe be a little bit more consideration on traffic and parking and cars compared to these other areas that are bigger and have more access and bigger road. So I think what you're saying though is that what do we think about his recommendation?
Yes, yeah. And I see Chuck, Lexi has his hand raised. I don't know how.
Yeah, so I want to go.
Call this for.
I want to go through the discussion first and finish your thing, and then we'll allow time for public comment and question.
Okay, so Chuck, we see you and we will circle back.
Yes, so we just have to watch the time to
Yep.
make sure that we have that.
I don't have a problem with multi-unit housing it above 5 as a conditional use, because one of the conditions would be, do you have septic?
Yeah.
And that makes sense to me. If you want to put up a Soviet brutalist building block, I mean, it might not mesh with our design. But
Well, that's design.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah, we're talking about a use. And the guy was talking about eliminating unnecessary restrictions. So it sounds like we're saying that we think having a conditional use of a 10-unit or more building in Jericho Center is not an unnecessary restriction, but that is something that we do want to keep in place.
I think without sewer and water, it's a non-starter anyway.
Well, it's theoretical, I guess,
Yeah.
but, well, it's not so much that we want to keep it in place, but we are, for the moment, comfortable with how David recommended it. Is is my thought on it, which I think is permitted in Jericho Corners and Riverside and conditional 10 or more we're talking about.
Yes,
Okay, and anything under 10, my understanding is permitted in all three.
yes,
Okay,
Yeah.
in his red line.
yeah,
Okay,
okay.
And the permit is conditional upon you got water and sewer.
right, exactly. Right. And then Heidi had weighed in on some of the auto-centric uses. And I think her comment was that she thought that they should be conditional, but not prohibited. And I think that historically, the concerns about something like a museum or an indoor recreation center is kind of the same thing that we were talking about before with entertainment. It's really just a matter of, many hundreds of people is this facility
scale question.
accommodating, right?
Yeah.
It's fit, scale, size, parking, circulation, which I hear Chris Flynn in my head saying, that's all site plan. Don't worry about that in your uses table. That's all in your site plan standards. And he,
Yeah.
probably right about that. So it might not be, if the site plan standards are effective and then maybe it's right. It doesn't necessarily need to be governed or restricted in the uses.
But it seems there's general agreement with the way that it has been proposed in the red line. Okay. We can go to the next one. All right, so this is about dimensional requirements and it says subdivisions, but it's more than just like lot size. It's about setbacks and building height. And this gets at what we were trying to tease out. I was trying to tease out before in terms of, are there like physical characteristic differences between the three villages? From the Enabling Better Places guide, it's really emphasizes making sure that your dimensional standards fit with existing or desired patterns. So if you go to the next slide. Oh, other next slide. So this is the revised proposal. You can see they're all the same, so there's no difference between the three villages, and that may be appropriate. They are less than what is in the current standards. So they are being changed to be less restrictive.
So more compact.
More compact. So road frontage is reduced from the 20 minimum and 20 max to 15 minimum, 75 foot max for road frontage. Anyway, just in general, they're all reduced. My question. So they're the same for each village. And is that right? I mean, are there perceived differences in the characteristics of the villages that are not reflected in the table, or are they really all the same?
Well,
Maybe they're not that different.
the only difference that I see is Jericho Center, where your maximum is 15 and your minimum is 15. If I'm reading that correctly, I don't know, 15 feet road frontage is not an awful lot. That's car width.
That's a typo on my part.
Okay.
It's supposed to be 1575, 1575, 1575. Yeah,
But do we want to limit 75? I know that makes for a nice, small, narrow lot. But if you're the first lot coming into town, generally the lot sizes shrink as you get closer to the road frontage shrinks as you get closer to the center of the town. So we're sort of putting an abrupt, I turn the corner now, it's all 75 or 15. But again, 15 is a driveway. So that means your house is going to be behind somebody else's house, which is fine if you want that.
But that's the minimum.
Yeah, that's the minimum.
So as long as you have at least 15, you can have a lot.
Yeah.
And if you have less than 15, then it's saying you can't have a lot.
But 75 feet is your maximum.
Mhm.
So most houses are going to be 40 feet wide. That's barely a house wide. Which is fine, I mean, if you want to do that, but I'm not sure I feel comfortable saying we have a maximum that's pretty small. And that, I don't know what the lot sizes are in terms of front lot right now in the corners, in the center, in Riverside. But I suspect a lot of them go well over 75 feet of road frontage.
So then this chart would be, according to David's recommendation, trying to create a desired pattern as opposed to what you're observing, which is it would not be reflecting the current pattern.
Correct.
So that's kind of a strategic choice that Chris is facilitating us to be making here, because what David's recommendation is to try to prevent future subdivision from continuing a very spread out pattern and trying to create the opportunity for more lots in a smaller space so that you have more businesses and more houses close together.
Yes.
And if you, without a maximum or with a much greater maximum, then your chances of creating that are reduced. I'm not arguing either way. I don't really know what I think about it, because when we were talking about this the last time, I think the comments from the planning commission were, why do we really even need a maximum? Because some people don't want to be close to the road, and this, you can't really over regulate. And one of the reasons I think that we had them all be the same is because the general sense was, let's not micromanage, let's keep it simple. If we can't come up with a really good reason for why they should be different, that's so obvious and compelling, then just have them be the same, I think is kind of what the.
I am less comfortable with the maximum. I understand what the goal is trying to achieve. And that's something that I'm still sort of struggling with, is the role of the.
do you think the
Restricted.
maximums are too big or too small, or
I think they're pretty small. I think I'm just struggling with the concept of maximum in general, in terms of prescriptiveness. And yet I know the goal of this is to create more lots within a given space.
But we're not. That's a goal, but we're actually forcing it rather than letting it occur. Because we're telling somebody who's got 300 feet of road frontage, you've got to put in 4 units in there. And they may say, economically, I'm better off putting in 2. And if I don't put in 2, I'm not going to put in anything.
No, you're not telling them how many units they have
No,
to
they've got
put
a
in.
maximum road frontage.
You're telling them if they were to subdivide.
Yeah.
The new lot that they create would have to meet this standard. And they could not build anything on it, and their old lot could, if they had a giant lot, it wouldn't matter. So it's really a profit-seeking owner or investor would probably be very happy with this, really, generally, unless, not necessarily building their own house, but if there are houses already there, then this is giving them a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, that's on the minimum side. But when you say the maximum is this, if there's 2 houses and you can put a 3rd house in the middle, but the third house is more than 75 feet of road frontage, you can't do it. And we want to encourage them
Right.
to do that.
Yep. Okay, so then the other thing I was thinking about is that in batch number 1, David proposed review standards and said, the zoning administrator can change any numeric standard by 10%. And the DRB can change any numeric standard, I thought, by 20%. So the maximum really, if you want to like come in, see Chris Flynn, hand in your paper and get your approval instantly, you meet these standards, or 10% up or down. If you want a 20% variance, I think it was called, then you would go to the DRB. So it's not impossible, but it was also limited about how much they could vary the standard. So maybe one way of slicing it is to enable the DRB more latitude, since you're trying to get things approved faster.
Let's make it easier for people to build.
Maybe the maximum is a little too low. Maybe the DRB needs a little bit more discretion as a way of sort of trying to keep the goal of small and compact, adding opportunity, but not over prescribing and not limiting things and not being able to handle certain specific situations, like I'm on a corner and I have a culvert and my house is close to the road, or whatever else.
Or I've got 65 feet of frontage, or I've got 160 feet of frontage, but I've only got enough septic for 3 buildings.
Right.
So one of them is going to have more than 75 frontage.
Right.
I'm not sure if I did my math right there, but you get what I'm saying.
I got your point. The current regulations have a minimum frontage, but have no maximum frontage. Is that right? I think that's right.
Correct.
Would you be okay if we said, anything above, and 75 seems to, anything above 100 feet of road frontage goes to zoning administrator for 10%, so now you got 110, or DRB for more than 20%, so now you got up to 120 feet.
Yeah, or even giving the DRB more discretion than 20%.
So anything over 10% goes to the DRB and they can decide what they do.
Well, I think you still have to give them some parameters, because then it's too discretionary and they don't like that. But so I think, or maybe we'll ask the professionals. That's our concern. Why don't you guys come back with something?
Okay.
Maybe a greater maximum and more discretion for the DRB, maybe something up to like 50%.
I have a question about structure height when we're ready to move on. So why do we need stories and feet?
Because you can have a 2-story building that's 45 feet tall if you have 25 foot ceilings. Ceilings in which.
Right, but why we could have 4 stories? If we just say maximum not to exceed 45, but this is 3 stories not to exceed 45. Don't understand why.
Some jurisdictions regulate by number of stories and some regulate by height.
Right, why don't we just do height? That would be mine,
I agree.
because I think that would also be consistent, I believe, for the commercial district, which is lower than this, but it just says, I think it's just 36 feet. I don't think we get into stories for commercial. But I don't under.
34.
The 34? Yeah, so I don't understand why the stories thing.
And why the 45 feet if we've got 34 in commercial?
Well, because I think David was suggesting that it be higher in the village centers. And I think I think it was you who pointed out, like, if you think about town hall and you think about church steeples and barn silos. Yeah, I think we gave him that. I think just have it be a number, black and white.
Keeping it 45
Yeah, because
and take out the stories.
seems like, I mean, or unless, what are we missing otherwise? Like, if I wanted 4 stories, but I didn't exceed 45 feet, why would that be in the interest of the town?
Isn't there a state reg that if you have more than 3 stories, you have to have an elevator? I think I remember hearing.
I don't
Something
know,
about that.
but that would be the owner's
Mhm.
problem or challenge. What are we missing? Why would one regulate stories rather than height?
I mean, it could be a aesthetics thing in terms of having it fit in with the scale of.
Boo!
Yeah. It could be, in some places where there's a lot of market pressure, a developer will try and cram as many floors into a building. So even if you can go up to 45 feet, or say you can go up to 50 feet, they'll have 5 floors, and with all of your stuff, your ceiling heights in a residential unit is 8 feet or less. So by specifying stories and a height, you're giving them space that they're not gonna try and cram something in and have undesirable residential ceiling heights.
But won't the market dictate if that's undesirable?
Yeah, undesirable sounds affordable to me,
Depends on what the market pressures are, right?
right?
If you're trying to max out what your return is on the land is so expensive that you're trying to cram in as much as you can.
And that's, we want that. Have as much as you can in there, because that's part of the solution to the housing problem we have.
Yeah, so if it's more just about making sure your building height is compatible, and you can figure out what you want to put within it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was, for me, the one that sticks out is the front yard setback. Because I would just want to set it. Because you want to, particularly if we're gonna build like a commercial street, you want to have a consistent facade. So I don't know why we have a range. I don't know why we just say you need to have a 12-foot.
We did talk about this, I think, before you were here. So because Wendy was just talking about Route 15 and the traffic. So if you're along Route 15 and you're building a house or you're building a business, it would be beneficial for you to probably be further back from the road. If you're in a new side street in the Riverside area near the market, it would be beneficial for you to be super close to the road, probably.
And then to keep it simple, was it just having one set of dimensions regardless of what street you're on, instead of saying a 15-foot setback on Route 15 and a 5-foot setback on?
We didn't
Or-
solve it. Actually, that was the feedback we gave to David about having the maximum, is like, we were worried about that because if you have a maximum in the front yard, especially along Route 15, that might actually limit your desire to develop there.
Especially if you've got parking that you've got
So,
to deal with in front of.
yeah,
building.
so I think-
It's not nearly enough.
I kind of think, I hear what you're saying, that you do want it to be consistent, but on the other hand, we probably are more comfortable with variability because the general sense is don't over-regulate, don't over-prescribe, don't tell everybody what to do. So I think my sense is probably the similar feedback to the road frontage, actually 25 feels small. And the discretion that the DRB has should be greater. And I realize it's gambling on what you're describing as a consistent street front, but, hopefully in like, a lot of these areas are infill, you're trying to fill in spaces. The only place where you really need it to be super consistent potentially is in the new development areas of Riverside. And I would think the developer would be somewhat motivated to do that because their sidewalk costs are gonna be much less, their infrastructure costs, laying the pipes under the ground. So they already have incentive probably to be pretty consistent.
Does that assume there's one developer developing the whole property?
No, but it might assume that there's one developer developing 3 or 4 adjacent lots. I mean, there's a certain appeal to having it be one developer.
Don't we have basically one developer looking at most of it already?
I mean, we have one owner.
Who's a developer?
Yeah, but we're not really that familiar with what their specific business plan is, whether they're gonna sell and then you could develop a lot and I could develop a lot, or they're gonna develop for you as a lessor. We don't know.
I do like the idea of variance in the front yard, just because looking down a long row of storefronts, yes, it's nice if you're in some areas, but when they move in and out, it creates more visual variation and more appealing. It allows someone to have a 5-10 foot setback, put an awning out front and have dining there.
All right, this has been super helpful.
Okay,
Those are all the points I wanted to go over, at least for the batch two stuff. Is there anything we didn't cover on any of these comments that you'd like to add?
Maybe the maximum lot coverage in the center of the Riverside property that we're looking at. Is there a reason not to allow more lot coverage? It just for example, if you look at Church Street, pretty much every one of those lots is covered by a building. Go to a major city, pretty much every one of those lots is. If you go to Richmond, in the center of town, that lot is basically 100% covered. And if we're looking to have a Richmond or Montpelier type center, why do we say 70% maximum?
Well, kind of also goes back to the giving more flexibility to the DRB too.
right. So this could
It
be,
is possible.
right, so this could be another one of those where the zoning administrator can vary 10% and the DRB discretion maybe is greater than 20% is what David recommended, but more like 50%. Because he's gonna want to make that consistent across the board, I would think, so that would work. I mean, 50% would get you more, so it's kind of crazy, but 50% would, up to 50% would get you 100% lot coverage.
Yes.
Yep.
Get you 105 to be precise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would feel comfortable with that. I don't think anybody would do it in the near term
Right,
unless they've got underground parking and everything else for the building they're putting up.
right.
But
Okay, anything else? Great, so we have time to welcome our public comment. So you guys were here first. So if you, I think there's a microphone like right above you. So if you wanted to offer a comment or ask a question, you just tell us your name and thank you for patiently waiting. Yeah, it'll hear you.
Chris Sims, I live here in the corners, and I totally agree with what you said, Wendy, about Route 15 being a defining piece of the corners. And it divides the corners so that there's really not a community feel for it unless we have some safe crossings.
Thank you.
Were you saying it would hear us even if we're sitting?
Yeah, it'll hear you either way.
Okay. I'm Reed Sims, live in Jericho Corners. I had a few comments if I could. One is that I think with road frontage maximums, are existing properties grandfathered in? And then could they split if needed, if it fit the minimum to maximum range? Okay.
Yes, the answer is yes. We're nodding our head for our minutes taker.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
As far as the differentiation, Chris, between the three town centers, I think one of the biggest, probably the biggest area of differentiation is walkability. And the ability to create better walkability is really tough here. Everything's so close. And the road is dangerous. So, having dangerous and loud, trucks using their air brakes to slow down, if they're willing to slow down on the way to the corner. It's quite loud. We're 4 houses away, 4 to 5 houses away from Route 15. And we hear it loudly. front yard setbacks was 5 feet minimum. To me, that seems extremely small. There's an example of a house at the corner of Lee River Road and Plains Road, in the corners here. And that house can't be much more than 5 feet from the road. The road was expanded, you know, to accommodate traffic, but it's a dangerous place. It's a dangerous place to be walking. There's no sidewalk. You're walking, and if a bigger truck comes along Lee River Road, you just about have to plaster yourself against the building. So I think 5 feet's way wrong. And I would say maybe it's something like 12 would be better, or something. Another,
Big snow pile up too.
yeah, another reason I think a larger minimum front yard setback of something like 12 feet might also give room for landscaping and gardens and things that can enhance the character of the town center, village center. I think that's about all I was going to say. Thank you.
So can you clarify, Chris, that when we say the front yard setback, that means the front of the building relative to the right of way?
To the property line.
To the property line. So the property line, like that's that's an old building. So I'm thinking a lot about Riverside, which is kind of a blank canvas currently. So the sidewalk is not in the lot. So theoretically, you've allowed for the sidewalk in the public thoroughfare. Then you have the lot line and then the yard from the lot line to the building. That's what front yard setback actually is.
It's beyond the right of way.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this was something, I don't know, this is something I need to understand better. Because, right of way here are rods, which is a new thing for me. I think it's like 16.5 feet or something like that.
Yes.
And so this gets into the questions of how do we want to activate our public spaces? How wide is the street right of way? 60 feet is a typical street right of way in a lot of places. How do you divvy that up? I think that typically leaves you like maybe with a 10-foot sidewalk. And if you put in a 4-foot tree box and you're with a 6-foot sidewalk, and then your minimum front yard setback can be used for things like your outdoor dining or your sidewalk cafes or other uses. So that's where I think it would be helpful. That's one of the questions about the front yard, is sort of looking at this a little more broadly in terms of how we want the public space to be used and what that front yard setback is, whether it's landscaped as a front yard, in which case 5 is tight, but is 12 feet a little more space. And then if you want outdoor activation or merchandise displayed, stuff like that, what's the right dimension for that? 5, 7, 12 feet? I don't know. I don't know. And that would be in addition to the 60-foot or the 3 rods or whatever the right of way dimension is. And I just don't know if the right of way dimension is spelled out anywhere. I think that would be part of the regulating plan.
Or in Riverside, the regulating plan. And then Jericho has public works specs. So
For
roads and
Yeah.
right of way and that kind of stuff. So, okay.
But if you're outside of the Riverside and or even you're in other parts of the Jericho Riverside area that are not in the development area, this all comes into play pretty quickly. So
say that again?
if you're not in the old mill area where the Jericho Market is, and you're in Riverside or anywhere else, the 5-foot setback comes into play pretty quickly because the existing road is there. If you're going into new development, there is no road, so you can do whatever you want to do.
You're
This
talking
is
about outside the village centers or?
in the village.
In the
centers,
village centers.
But
Right.
not in the core of
But
Riverside.
Not in the core of Riverside,
Right.
which is undeveloped right
Right.
now. So where it is developed, this does become a limitation for what you can do, where you can put things.
Right.
To work around existing buildings. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's sort of the lack of flexibility around, my house is already 6 feet from the road. What does that mean for me? What can I do with that 6 feet of space I've got?
And it could be that the reason why it's written as 5 feet is because you don't want to write a regulation that makes an existing building out of compliance.
Right.
But
It's
we
the
have some that
minimum.
are already.
It doesn't mean you have to be that close to the road, it means you can be that close to the road. Oh, not that close to the road, that close to the front of your lot.
This is Reed Sims again, commenting. Wouldn't 5 feet be too small to accommodate anything? If it was 5 feet from the right of way, and the right of way is maybe 60 feet, or I don't know what.
Usually it's about
in the
32,
town.
it's about 32 feet from the center line.
Okay.
I think we
Guess
can't
I'm on
really
track.
solve it here, because we don't really have the right information. And probably some illustration, and so maybe, and that's something I'm sure David, our consultant, who's not here tonight, also is the one who created some of these dimensions. He might be able to help justify it, the rationale.
Yeah, well, I would imagine the rationale is that the guideline is to create standards that reflect existing conditions and existing patterns.
Yeah.
And it could be that that's where the 5 to 25 comes from.
Right, exactly. Okay, I want to go to Chuck. Hi, Chuck. Thank you so much for waiting. I know it's really hard.
I want to object to your, I guess, intention to make a 10-unit housing project subject to conditional use because of wastewater. Basically, what you'd be doing is saying, well, we're going to make a conditional use because of wastewater, which will then bring the project subject to, community complaints and DRB complaints on a whole host of issues. One of the most important recommendations from the Housing Committee was that wastewater is to be regulated by the state and not by town zoning. With your intention right now, you're fine with someone building a 10-bedroom house, but you object to 10 studio apartments. You're fine with someone building a fourplex of 4 4-bedroom apartments, but you have an issue with 4 studio apartments. A bed and breakfast with 10 bedrooms is a permitted use, but a project with 10 studio apartments is subject to, being redesigned by the DRB. Wastewater is regulated by the state, and you should zone for zoning. And if somebody wants to build something, they need a wastewater and water permit from the state to go ahead. You should not be zoning on wastewater. The second point is, you're using zoning to make about 86% of Jericho off limits to people of low and middle incomes. You want to contain them in a very small area. And then you do things like you've got a 25 foot maximum front yard. That's cruel. When you guys walked around the village centers, well, you all commented about how noisy it was. I live in a village center, 40 feet from the road, and it's miserable. You have to, if you have a 25 maximum setback on housing, certainly in Jericho Center, you will have seen the last new house along Browns Trace Road in Jericho Center. You won't see another one. The few houses that have been built in the last 10 years, none of them are anywhere near 25 feet from the road. It's miserable living that close. You know, none of you live in the village centers, and you just have to spend some time here. It's cruel, number one, to limit where people can live. And then in the area where you're living, in that limited area, you have this regulation is forcing them to raise children 25 feet from a road. We've had 3 pedestrian deaths in Jericho Center. It's not fair. It's cruel.
SJ.
Okay, I will try to be quick. I just wanted to call out, the listing all of the prohibited and conditional uses, giving us that word list was just brilliant. It was so helpful. And so just thank you for that. I never would have thought to do that. And it was really helpful in thinking about the conversation that you all were having. The 3 big questions that the Affordable Housing Committee asked you all to think about, I'll just remind you of, which were, how does this impact infill feasibility? Does this impact the cost to build? And is this regulation really necessary? And that last one goes to the point that Chuck is making. Like, are some of these regulations redundant with federal or state regs that already exist, or with natural impediments that are already going to keep those kinds of buildings from happening anyway? And just to push back a little bit on, well, we can update the regs later. We have a handful of known issues with the regs that we would love to update that are holding up projects that we know would like to be going, and we haven't moved on those. And so updating the regs isn't really a nimble, flexible, responsive thing to new technology or new opportunities that may come up. So really thinking about, is the regulation necessary now, rather than thinking, well, we'll fix it if it becomes a problem. And then the last thing I would say is the DRB discretion. I think, Susan, you said earlier that, the DRB really wants to enforce clear rules. And when things aren't clear, they, well, I'll just leave it at that. DRB discretion, I think, is something that, may be a bit of a culture shift for the DRB and how we do things. And, thinking about also conditional use, and, nothing kills housing like conditional use and public meetings. And so thinking about those things as you're thinking about, and I do agree that wanting to streamline things, make building easier, giving the zoning administrator and the DRB more discretion to be able to do things is absolutely a good thing. And we should make sure that we're taking some of the roadblocks out of the system and some of the kinks out of the system, but also recognizing how they work, and how that either helps housing happen or stands in the way of housing. And it may just be something as simple as being more clear than we've been previously about what conditional means for certain uses, or what discretion really means, when to use it, how to use it, and putting some guardrails on it so that they feel comfortable making decisions, aren't worried about litigation. And yeah, I think that's it.
Okay, thank you very much.
Follow-up, just comment on that. Have we had conversations with the DRB about things that we're proposing that impacts them?
Somewhat. So Jeff York is the chair of the DRB, and he's been tracking what we're doing.
Okay.
He came to talk to us at the farmer's market this summer. And I think Chris Flynn did a good job of kind of representing their interests. I haven't had like a formal review from them, and I kind of get the sense that they want to stay a little bit firewalled in a sense. Like, I think Chris brought forward to David at the beginning of the project things that he knew were not working well. Like, I think the driver of updating a lot of the definitions came from Chris Flynn. So I think sort of they're represented through him, but I think we could follow up with Chris Flynn and make sure that, do they want to have a review? Do they want to weigh in? Do they want to comment? And I'm hoping and assuming that Chris Flynn is gonna stay involved in the background somewhat, but still advising us. Okay, I think we need to move on. Yes? Okay,
You want to review any of the statements on the minimum front yard and maximum front yard, Chuck brought up. But I think he has a valid point. If you're on Route 15, if you're on Brown's Trace Road, 25 feet max is basically you're listening to Jake breaks in your living room as you're sitting down.
I have two thoughts on the front road, on the front yard setback. Yeah, the front yard setback. I don't know if we actually know. I don't know if we've done an assessment to actually figure out. I don't know where the 5 to 25 is coming from. Like the big Italianate house that's over here, I think that's more than 25 feet, right? So I don't know where that's coming from. So I'd like to look at that a little more and see if I can pull together more information so that there's a little more behind that, if it hasn't already been done. It may already been done. The other is, it doesn't make sense to me to have the same front yard setback for Route 15 as it does for a new road that's cutting through in Riverside. So I think that we may want to look and see if there's a hierarchy of
Right.
setbacks depending on what the road is.
right, and there's also, well, and what he was referring to is Brown's Trace. So Brown's Trace isn't quite, it's not a state highway like Route 15.
But it's like a Route
It's
15.
a major,
Yeah.
and we do have classifications of roads, and we have like collector roads and so maybe that classification would help.
Or just number of vehicles per hour.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
peak
I
vehicles.
guess I kind of felt like, all right, we talked about it, we heard the public comment, and now it's gonna be Chris and David's job to synthesize it and update the red line based on what they've heard.
I would just go a step further and say, based upon what we've heard, I would like to see a traffic volume adjustment. For the
Correlation.
Correlation, yeah,
Right.
yeah.
I agree there needs to be some amendments to that, but traffic volume isn't that going to be just, it's variable in terms of, not being too articulate, but what the volume is in 2024 is gonna be different than what the volume is in
Right.
2032.
I think we can use our existing road types,
Yeah.
which kind of reflects volume and capacity and how big the road is, how wide it is, all those kinds of things. Okay, so then, Chuck, do you have to say what you want to say?
Not if you answer my phone calls.
I answer your phone calls. No, go ahead. We'll give you another minute.
I encourage you to, or somebody to go through and identify all of the requirements that you're putting on homes. Like one is burying the electrical lines and really understanding what the actual costs are and decide whether you're willing to add that on to the cost of a house for someone with low or middle incomes.
Okay,
And also, I don't, there was some talk about in terms of a road going back to housing kind of off the street, and that for the first, if there was a road that was only 100 feet, it would only have to be like 10 feet wide or 12 feet wide. I think it is important that the easement, the 60-foot easement requirement for a road going back should be reduced however long the road is. I understand that 100 feet at 10 feet might be appropriate because you can, for a road that's only 10 feet. But if the road is 200 feet, it should not have to be 60 feet wide. Brown's Trace Road is 22 feet wide. You know, the easement should be reduced from 60 for however long the road is. I like David's idea about making it only 10 feet wide if the road is only 100 feet, sort of within the length of a fire hose. But if the
Yeah.
road is longer, it shouldn't have to be 60 feet.
So I'm not following the like part.
So right now, if I wanted to build a house in my backyard, I would have to have a 60-foot wide easement for a road to be able to put a house in my backyard. Or to put 4 houses in my backyard.
This is
And
like a.
Yeah.
which is ridiculous. I would have to knock a barn down to do it. And David had the suggestion that if the road back to a house is only 100 feet, that we don't worry about having to get fire trucks back there because
Right, 'cause-
they can run a hose from the road.
Right,
I understand the terms.
Right.
I understand the terminology now.
yep.
Yeah.
So
Okay,
now,
all right.
if the road is 200 feet, right now, it's, unless you change it, that road would have to be have a 60-foot easement, which is kind of silly when you have a 75, you know, maximum frontage. So, you know, make it 15 feet or something, but not 60.
Is this specific to the village centers or is this a broader issue?
I think it's townwide.
Everywhere. It makes sense everywhere. What he's saying, we did talk about it with David and we were all like, yes, that makes total sense. And
Okay.
I don't know if it's in the regs or if it's in the public works specs. But anyway, okay, now we really do have to move on because it's 8:45. Okay, so now we are moving on to item number 6. Thank you so much for your comments. First report is from Chris Shaheen, Jericho's town planner. Doesn't that have a good ring to it? Don't you like the way that sounds?
All right, thank you. So I've got 3 quick updates. So one, the future land use map update is coming from Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission. So this is part of something that we're going to do for the state. They have a whole timeline that they're preparing to roll out, where they're going to be working with each of the towns within Chittenden County. So I will be coordinating with them to figure out what that timeline is. Fortunately for us, the town plan, recently that the town plan has a whole section that has looked at our future land use map. So I think we are well positioned to begin that discussion with them. We've got a place to start with on that. So I will be coming to you with more information on that. So it's just something we'll have to factor into our schedule. Also, just this week, I am going to the Northern New England Planning Conference, which is in Stowe. I'm attending sessions on housing and trails, and it's just really great information. So that's something that I can bring back and share with you as it comes up. We were talking before about just the challenges with building houses and building at all, and even just making a project work at 100 AMI, forgetting about trying to hit affordable levels is just really difficult and not feasible, which is why everything's luxury. And then in terms of planning priorities, thank you everyone for setting aside the time to meet with me. I also met with each of the select board members. Lots of stuff to work on. So this is just like a list of some of the things that have come up in my discussions with people in terms of what we need to be working on. So also at a future meeting, I'll be working with Susan and we're going to have a discussion about what the planning priorities are, what at least my work plan, helping to shape my work plan, which is going to be shaped a lot by CC, RPC, but also what we want to do as Jericho. So anyway, that's all that I've got for my update.
Have
Okay,
fun and stuff.
yeah. So you're driving back and forth every day?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
I'm tracking my mileage.
Uh-huh. Yeah. It's pretty nice drive though.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah,
nice.
yeah.
You've missed the worst of the leaf peeper traffic.
Yeah.
If you tried to go from Stowe back to the interstate last weekend, was backed up past like the chicken and cider mill practically.
That's come up a lot for other towns. So it's the northern New England APA area is Maine, Vermont, and New Hampshire. And so it's interesting, just the traffic around fall color, which is something I've never really had to think about. It's something that's happening all throughout northern New England, which is interesting. And then there was something else that had come up, and I can't remember what it was. That was a common thread, but anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Sabina, do you have any updates for the group?
Nope.
Wendy? Eric?
Nope.
Okay, the only thing I'll add is that I will have the pleasure of going to a conference with Chris on November 1st, the Municipal Day in Montpelier. Lots of sessions, lots of good people. I went a long time ago. I think I went with Jason once or twice. It's pretty interesting
We
conference.
did that once,
Yeah, but then-
8 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, we split up sessions.
Yeah, it's good.
If anybody wants to go, you're welcome to still ask the town to register you if you want to go. I think it's a Friday, right? November 1st.
Okay, this Friday.
Oh, yeah, this Friday.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think that is it for me. Any other business? New other business? I'll just add one thing. I did talk to Catherine McBain's a little bit about the schedule for town meeting reimagined and the budget. And they have now published a schedule on Join in Jericho, which Sabina pointed me to. And it shows all the dates that they have for meetings on the budget. And they said that they were gonna warn for the capital budget hearing,
Mhm.
but they didn't really outline when they were gonna be working on the capital budget. And Catherine said today they haven't yet picked those dates, but they will be probably in November, probably late November, maybe early December. So I asked her how the planning commission could participate in that. And thinking that maybe one or two of us would want to volunteer to participate in the select board work session. And my thought is some homework, pre-work, which would be going through the town plan and identifying for each of the main chapters, what are the items that should be considered in the capital plan, and also talking with Catherine about how it's going to take Jericho a year or 2 or 3 to get really good at capital planning. And I'm not expecting that we have this comprehensive plan, and the planning commission is not in a position to recommend a capital plan this year, but I could anticipate us being in that position next year. And so for this year, I wanted us to participate and contribute, but not propose, but being set up for next year. So think about that. I'll probably ask for a volunteer.
I'll say right up front, I'm perfectly prepared to say to the town, the planning commission should be ready to say to the town, you need to set aside up to $5 million, a sinking fund to build $5 million for wastewater.
Okay, so then maybe you should go to the work session and
We'll see if I can be there for it.
and contribute that. They don't know when they are yet, so I can't say no yet. You can't say you,
yes either.
right, not saying no, but I'm not saying yes. Okay, so then wrap up the planning for next meeting. So it sounds like now October 12th is up in the air.
November 12th.
I mean, November
Yeah.
12th. We might look for a different date, maybe November 13th, maybe November 14th. Do people have availability next week? No, 2 weeks in general?
We can send
That's
out
my
a
phone.
Okay.
poll or something.
Okay, and then the plan for the 19th is to, if we can do batch 3 in the interim, then the plan for the 19th is kind of wrap our comments, finalize our comments. I think is what you showed on the timeline.
Yeah.
And then do we have any other agenda items that we know about for the 19th? Not yet.
I got it.
Okay. Okay, now we wanted to have an executive session to finish up our discussion of our PC vacancy. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay, so I would like to make a motion to go to executive session for the purpose of discussing personnel. Eric will second. So all those in favor of going to executive session, say aye. Aye. Sabina?
And
Okay,
I'm
and-
going to stop recording now.
Okay, I want to amend my motion that, or no, I'm not going to amend my motion. That's it. Okay, so we all aye, so we'll stop recording.